Then Emily will speak and we will follow it with discussion. Then there will be a few announcements, and then folks will have an opportunity to purchase pamphlets and raffle tickets, and you have the opportunity to get your pamphlet signed if you wish. All right, so please stand for the Black National Anthem. For in-person attendees, the lyrics are on your chair. All right, 1, 2, okay, 3. Let every voice All right, thank you very much, everyone. All right, Black History Month presentations are very special to the Freedom Socialist Party. Our foundational text, Revolutionary Integration, details how the Black struggle in the United States and the revolutionary Black leadership it forged is essential to the liberation of the global working class as a whole. This Black History Month, we are incredibly excited to debut, right, my prop, 2 new pamphlets, A Revolutionary Call for Black Reparations and What Next for the Black Lives Matter movement, that delve into what is needed for Black people in the United States to achieve the just demand of reparations and ideas on how to stop police brutality. These pamphlets are written to engage in discussion, debate, and action. As a Black and Chinese comrade, I am incredibly excited that the Freedom Socialist Party has crafted our positions on these topics. During the Black Lives Matter protests, it was inspiring to see young queer folks of color who were leading the movement. The militancy and radical intersectionalism they brought is exactly what we want to build upon. And the issue of reparations is still being debated to this day. In California, the Reparations Task Force has decided that reparations will be limited to those who can prove they are the descendants of slaves. In San Francisco, the African American Reparations Advisory Committee is preparing a report on reparations for those living in San Francisco. A revolutionary call for Black reparations delves into the various arguments and synthesizes them into what will unite our class, not divide it. Today, I am delighted to introduce our featured speaker. Emily Wu Yamasaki is the national coordinator of the Comrades of Color Caucus of the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women. She is a union activist with Legal Services Local 2320 of United Auto Workers and an organizer with the NYC Mobilization for Reproductive Justice. Emily has published writings related to the fight for African American liberation, being Asian in America, and queer issues. She grew up in San Francisco and lives in New York City. Guest, Emily Wu Yamasaki. All right.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you everyone for being here today. It's great to see everyone in the room and also on Zoom. And I just wanted to especially thank my family for being here today. Well, really, every month should be Black History Month. Black History Month is a time to celebrate achievements and victories won by African Americans, such as public schools formed by formerly enslaved people during Black Reconstruction, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, both of which benefited all of society. Black struggle has been and continues to be a shining light in the major movements for social change. Black workers are at the forefront of important labor battles, like against Amazon in Bessemer, Alabama, to locally here, where just 3 days ago, the Longshore Workers Union stopped work, marched and rallied at the Harry Bridges Plaza as part of an international day of action to free radical journalist and political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal. The teachers are rallying at the Board of Education this Tuesday for better pay and working conditions. And there are service employees at SEIU in the house today. Yay. African Americans are leading struggles against voter suppression and attacks on critical race theory, as well as reading texts by writers of color in the schools. Uncompromising Black women and queer and trans folks make crucial connections between issues like in the fight for reproductive justice, not only for free, accessible abortion on demand, but also for an end to sterilization abuse, for 24-hour childcare, and an end to disparities in healthcare, as well as other key demands that the Mobilization for Reproductive Justice is fighting for. But Black History Month is also a time for us to recognize that after over 400 years, these are dire times for Black Americans. Daily forms of racism are faced by Black people in the US in education, housing, employment, healthcare, the list goes on. But I do think that police murders are in the forefront of our minds. We hear of the ones that make the news, like Tyree Nichols, killed by Memphis cops in January, but many don't even make the headlines. Nearly 3 years since the death of George Floyd and the first Black Lives Matter protests of that period, we find ourselves faced with these centuries-old questions. How can we end the murders by police? How can we win reparations for past and ongoing injustices? And ultimately, how can we end systemic racism? The 2 booklets that have just been published by the Freedom Socialist Party's Red Letter Press that Christina announced were written by my comrade Christina Lopez in Seattle on the Black Lives Matter movement, and myself on a revolutionary call for Black reparations. And we wrote them as really tools for the movement to help tackle these questions. And we really do believe these questions are urgent questions for the movement. So today, I'm just going to talk a little bit of the background of the documents, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter booklet, and then a little bit about the reparations booklet. And then I look forward to hearing from you in discussion. So as Christina said, we're really excited to be celebrating the publication of these new booklets. They're actually written on behalf of and largely from discussions that were held in the National Comrades of Color Caucus. And this caucus itself was formed out of a struggle against racist attacks on the organizations, the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women. And it continues to be a vital space where members of color work together to build a leadership team and to really dig into issues impacting communities of color and to develop proposals to bring to the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women as a whole. I really want to thank Red Letter Press, specifically the publisher, our publisher, Helen Gilbert. And I also want to thank my editors, Susan Williams and Gary Hodderson of the Freedom Socialist Party. So with the Black Lives Matter movement booklet that Christina Lopez wrote, she wrote it from the experience that she and the Freedom Socialist Party had in the Black Lives Matter upsurge of 2020, 2021, and seeing so many people searching for solutions. But that also, after being at such a high pitch, the movement has waned. Christina was personally deeply affected by the brutal police beating of Rodney King, which many of us probably remember in Los Angeles in 1991. Some of the things that Christina talks about that I think are so important are the fact that, yes, the BLM protests of 2020 were a historic uprising, but what made them historic? They were largely led by youth, women, queer and trans folks who were fed up with establishment politicians and simple policy-based approaches. As Christina talks about in her booklet, the protests reverberated internationally around issues of racism against Black people, as well as around police brutality, not only in the United States, but in other countries around the world. In the BLM movement, feminists have forged a multi-issue intersectional approach that demands that gender, sexual orientation, disability, and class all be seen as inseparable from race in the way that they truly are. Black women are fatally shot by cops at rates higher than women of other races. Breonna Taylor was shot dead by cops in her own home in March 2020, just 2 months before George Floyd was murdered that May. Say her name. The BLM upsurge even helped spark more of an awareness of structural racism and the connection to the capitalist system. In response to the pressures from the protests, some superficial gestures were made at the policy level, like around supposed reduction in police funding. But in fact, fundamentally, things did not really change. Last month in January, just days after cops killed Tyree Nichols, Black double amputee Anthony Lowe was shot 11 times in the back and died at the hands of California police. Also in January, young non-binary Latinx environmental activist and forest defender known as Tortuguita was murdered by Atlanta police forces in a raid of a protest encampment at the Cop City training facility. As of this past November, a report showed that 15 transgender people were killed by police or while incarcerated in jails, prisons, or ICE detention centers since 2013. Native American people are actually killed in police encounters more than any other ethnic group. But this is not to be confused with the fact that Black people are still killed by police at a higher rate than other groups. The desire for radical change that was stirred by the BLM uprising is still there among many, but the movement has waned, and a clear course for the movement is needed. Programmatic and strategic shortcomings of certain sectors of the BLM movement held the movement back. And actually, this is not unique to the Black Lives Matter movement, but these kinds of tendencies, in fact, hold back other movements as well. Some of those sectors that Christina talks about in her booklet are reformists, who limit the fight to single issues and are tied to the nonprofit industrial complex. Some of them have launched their electoral careers from BLM or financially skimmed off of it. There are also cultural nationalists who elevate race at the expense of other issues like gender, sexual orientation, and don't tie in class. The Black officers involved in the killing of Tyree Nichols and the pro-police roles of Mayor Breed and District Attorney Jenkins in San Francisco underscore how the fact that race by itself and separate from class is not a unifying factor. London Breed proposes increasing the SFPD budget by $27 million, while DA Jenkins is not holding the officers who killed Sean Moore and Keita O'Neill accountable. Another important section of Christina's booklet is about the problem in the movement of replacing strategy, which is a long-range plan for how to achieve a goal, with tactics, which is a short-range method, such as marches, strikes, or boycotts. This is basically a character of anarchist. In the BLM upsurge, the tactic of civil disobedience was at times substituted for a strategy for eliminating racism. Since the police murder of Tyree Nichols, a lot of narrative in the media has been about the solution simply being changing police culture. But what is that culture rooted in? It is rooted in a centuries-old institution of policing that goes all the way back to slavery, where the role of the police began as catchers of enslaved laborers. And what is the institution of policing rooted in? Racism in the US was created by capitalists to justify the institution of slavery and the theft of indigenous land and genocide of Native people. This is why both booklets call for hitting at the root of racism, capitalism, in order to permanently end police violence, to win full reparations, and ultimately to end systemic racism. The FSP's ideas of revolutionary integration provide radical strategies for achieving fundamental change that will in turn make it possible to change the culture. And with that, I just wanted to read a short quote from Christina's booklet. The theory of revolutionary integration advocates for an integrated multiracial fight against capitalism based on working class unity and led by Black workers. It holds that total Black liberation requires the current economic system to be replaced with a socialist one. The analysis observes that the predominant historical direction of the Black struggle has been towards eliminating segregation and achieving integration into a just society. Revolutionary integration recognizes the key leadership role of Black workers, especially Black women, because they deal with the worst of capitalism and have the most to gain from overturning it. But in the Freedom Socialist Party, we're not just about talk. This event is called Words into Action. The Black struggle has always been a priority for the Freedom Socialist Party and our sister organization, Radical Women, since the founding of both over 50 years ago. The ideas in these booklets are meant to be taken out into the movement. And I just wanted to mention a few grassroots campaigns that the Freedom Socialist Party and Radical Women have been active in. Locally, some of you may know of or were even active in the /SFPD Stash Guns and Cash campaign to reduce and redistribute police funding. Christina in Seattle and the FSP there were part of a campaign that resulted in the removal of police unions from the King County Labor Council in Seattle. In New York City, the campaign for an elected civilian review board, which the FSP initiated and I helped to start, centers on police accountability legislation called the Community Power Act. And it calls for a civilian review board with binding powers that is elected and whose members would represent the communities most impacted by police violence. It would also be paired with an elected independent prosecutor. There's a lot that Christina addresses that I just don't have time to cover in these comments today, but that's a really great reason for you to get a copy of the booklet yourself and see what you think. Both booklets address the issues from a socialist, feminist, and revolutionary integrationist perspective. And I wanted to share just a little bit of my own personal connection to these issues and how I came to write this booklet on reparations. I have a very personal connection to the whole demand for reparations as an Asian American, actually a Pan-Asian American, with Japanese as well as Chinese and Korean ancestry. In the booklet, I talk about the whole campaign for Japanese American redress and reparations, but also the fact that what was won was so measly compared to what was experienced by the loss of family, home, and property. I grew up with a mom who was active in the fight for a third world college and ethnic studies in San Francisco State. So my own orientation from very early on was multiracial and multicultural. From this perspective, I've written articles on relationships between the Asian and Black communities, as well as being Asian in America. And many of my writings have appeared in the Freedom Socialist newspaper, which I meant to have a copy of. The Freedom Socialist newspaper, which is the printed revolutionary feminist voice of the Freedom Socialist Party. My own experience with racism started long before the COVID era wave of anti-Asian attacks. And as a queer and non-binary person of color, I've always been collectively identified with the multiply oppressed. My feminism was heavily impacted by Black feminist and anti-capitalist pioneers like the Combahee River Collective. My thinking about the Black movement was rounded out by my understanding of revolutionary integration, the concept that I read about, that was developed by founders of the FSP out of their own very experience in the civil rights movement. It was the revolutionary integrationist and socialist feminist ideas that originally drew me to the Freedom Socialist Party and radical women. In the 1980s with the FSP, I supported the New York 8+, which was a group of Black revolutionary activists who were targeted by the FBI and falsely arrested. The ongoing fight to free radical journalist and political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal has always been one that I and the FSP have been passionate about, and the Bay Area FSP has been very active in. You can see the beautiful free Mumia and all political prisoners. And in my day job, I work as a housing rights paralegal advocate with tenants in Northern Manhattan who are mostly Latinx and African American. I believe that the fight for reparations is inseparably linked with the struggle to end systemic racism. And it must address both past as well as ongoing injustices. These are two key ideas in my booklet. Reparations are a just and long overdue demand. The demand made by Black people for reparations in the US is nearly as old as the institution of slavery itself. One of the earliest fights for reparations that I cite in the booklet was waged by freed woman Belinda Sutton in 1783, and she won that struggle. Wow. Likewise, for Native Americans, treaty land rights have long been a central issue for the indigenous peoples of North America. But despite legislation on paper, the majority of claims by indigenous people for compensation or recognition of their sovereign rights have gone unmet. The demand for reparations gained more traction during the BLM upsurge. And the booklet comes from the perspective of the FSP that the problem of reparations is not whether or not they are owed, but how and when they can be won, what form they should take, and who should benefit. There are international models of reparations that I talk about that include Germany's compensation to Jewish Holocaust survivors and claims and proposals from African, Caribbean, and indigenous peoples worldwide. Many of you have probably been seeing in the local newspapers that the Board of Supervisors of San Francisco, as Christina mentioned, is about to hold hearings on a reparations plan that was drafted by the African American Reparations Advisory Committee. And the main feature of it is individual payments of $5 million to what they call eligible self-identified Black or African American city residents. Many Asian American groups have actually been supporters of these reparations efforts. I wouldn't actively oppose these efforts, but the problem with single payouts is that they keep recompense on an individual level, and that doesn't address Black communities as a whole or get to the root of systemic racism. In fact, individual compensation actually diverts people from organizing against our common enemy, the capitalist system. Individual reparations also has the potential to divide rather than unite the working class. And a key example of this is the ADOS, the American Descendants of Slavery, which is headed by academics William Darity and Kirsten Mullen. ADOS calls for reparations to be given only to direct descendants of actual enslaved African Americans. And the problem that I see with this is that it pits African Americans against Black immigrants. I also write about many other approaches and details of reparations that, again, I don't have time to talk about today, but another great reason to please buy the pamphlet. A goal of the document that I had, given what I was just talking about, was to develop an approach to reparations that would have the potential to unite rather than divide us. The form of reparations proposed in the booklet is actually a collective one. And I'd like to just read a short excerpt that talks a little bit more about that. FSP advocates a form of reparations that will truly make a difference in the lives of all Black Americans, especially those who need change most. These are forms of collective restitution for the evils of slavery and racism through the enactment of massive social programs rather than individual compensation. These programs are designed to lift up the conditions of poor and working class Black people as a whole. Programs that attack the institutions and conditions that generate Black inequality can, at the same time, benefit all exploited workers and oppressed groups. The document contains a section called FSP's 10-point program for reparations. And these proposals that I write about in the booklet are the result of studying historical precedents of campaigns for reparations, as well as discussions with Black activists, and then in our Comrades of Color caucus, and then as our party as a whole. The 10-point program highlights concrete demands related to a national healthcare system that particularly addresses the needs of Black women and queer and trans folks, school funding, job opportunities, restoring affirmative action, housing for all, ending police terror, the school to prison pipeline and environmental racism, securing the right to vote, and a formal apology for slavery and Jim Crow. These transitional demands address the need to fight for reforms that can help improve our conditions in the here and now, while at the same time, they show that ultimately we will never win all these reforms in their entirety under capitalism. And so ultimately, we need to get rid of capitalism.
Right.
A Black reparations program will have to be national. And to implement reparations, I talk about community-directed implementation with elected labor community committees, starting at the local level, that would oversee the whole of distribution of reparations. And this is an idea that builds on Queen Mother Moore. She's considered the mother of modern reparations, building on her call for grassroots networks to implement reparations. As for the ever controversial question of how to fund reparations programs, let's nationalize under workers' control the major industries and banks and the insurance companies whose very existence and profit arose from slavery. I identify with the Black struggle because I know as an Asian American, my fight is inseparably linked with it. And this is why during Black History Month, and really all year round, it is important to remember what this country owes to Black workers who were instrumental in making America what it is today. Black history is American history. We must build on the legacy of movers and shakers like Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells, Ella Baker, and Fannie Lou Hamer. The victories they fought for and won improved not just Black lives, but they lifted all of us: Native Americans, Latinx, Asian, women, LGBTQ+, disabled, youth, elderly, workers of all colors. But Black people cannot do it alone, nor can any other oppressed group do it alone. We need to build militant, multiracial, united fronts in which groups come together with our own banners and work across our differences to march together behind a common issue or demand, such as reparations, police accountability, or reproductive justice, or against the threat of fascism, which grows daily. All of us have a role to play in fighting for reparations. The entire world will win through Black reparations, and will win through overturning the very system at the root of police brutality and racism. Both booklets rest on this premise. So I really, again, I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say in the discussion today. And I also want to invite folks to sign up for an upcoming study group that the FSP is hosting here locally, starting on March 8th. And it'll be held here, both at New Valencia Hall, but also you can participate via Zoom. It'll be an opportunity also to really get into these issues in more depth together. Also, if you read the booklet and talk with folks here today and the ideas resonate with you, I encourage you to get involved with the Freedom Socialist Party. We're an activist organization and we want to work with you. Also, you'll have a chance to attend the reparations hearings. My understanding is that the public is invited or allowed to attend, and you can speak to Christina if you're interested in attending with the Freedom Socialist Party. And so just with that, I want to wind up with a short excerpt from the reparations booklet, and then we can have discussion. The quest for reparations is directly tied to the unrealized freedom struggle of the US Black populace. A fulfilled freedom struggle for Black people in the US would mean a permanent end to systemic racism, white supremacy, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and economic injustice. This can only be realized through a revolution with militant Black leadership that replaces the racist capitalist patriarchy with a socialist feminist society. That is the key to full liberation and equality for everyone.